Well, hello, everybody. If you are just joining us, you would mute yourself. Welcome to the February 9th, 2021 Planning Board meeting. This is Kristen Ferguson, Chair of the Planning Board, and I'm calling this virtual meeting to order at 7:01 recorded. I'm going to take roll for our Planning Board members who are here. So if you just unmute yourself and let us know you're here. Mr. Say.
Present.
Yeah. Mr. Bazdet?
Here.
Ms. Orvidal?
Here.
Ms. Miller?
Here.
And Ms. Ferguson. I know Ms. McNeely will not be here today, and we will check the time for when Burton Flint joins us. So, on tonight's agenda, we have plenty of administrative business. We are primarily preparing for the town meeting and getting our warrant articles in order. So we have a lot to discuss about kind of iterative steps going forward, in addition to a couple of draft minutes. But before we do that, we were going to have MAPC on the, well, actually, before let me say that, speaking of town meeting, we have an opportunity on Saturday, February 27th. It's a preview of all the articles of town meeting. And there are, we would just kind of say, this is what we're doing for each article and a brief summary. It's not presentations or anything. And I wanted to open it up. Should there be any planning board members who would like to be on that meeting? It's a way that you get to do a fairly quick summary of our articles, but you get to also hear all of the other proposed articles for the warrant. So I'm just planting that seed, and then I will come back at the end and see if anybody would like to do that. So then the first order of business is the Thoreau Depot redevelopment discussion. We were scheduled to have MAPC on because we're kind of trying to march this forward to propose any zoning bylaws in a potential special town meeting in the fall. And I believe we have Chris coming on one more time. Is that correct? I just got her right when she took a drink. So yes. Chris is due to come one more time. So what I wanted to do tonight is kind of gather all of our questions so that we really maximize our time with him next time we see him. So one of the things that influences this is kind of some recent, is it legislative changes? Is that the description, Elizabeth? And yes. So just wanted to have kind of a little roundtable discussion for the board here to make sure we understood kind of what this new information was so that we can formulate the right questions for Chris when we see him next. We'll have him back again in March. So I don't know, Elizabeth, if there's anything worth sharing on your screen to kind of help with this part of the discussion about things that might influence that business district.
So this was, I don't know if the board got the document or got the link on the website, but this document was provided to the board, and it's a summary of those provisions, housing provisions in the economic development bill. And so the item, the reason that MAPC we decided to postpone was so that the planner could speak with the housing specialists, and they were also meeting with DHCD on their guidance for MBTA communities, where the other document was for MBTA communities. They are going to be required to provide housing and as of right and I believe it's in here, as of right, and I believe it's like 15 units per acre. Yeah, so in MBTA communities, they're towns are going to have to develop zoning, at least one district of a reasonable size. And that's why I was talking with Chris at MAPC, the Throw Depot, primarily the Crosbys market site would be a fairly good site. And this is, and Burton Flint just joined the meeting. This is where he wanted to get a little bit more guidance from DHCD because it would make a difference with the Thoreau Depot, how that advances. Previously, the board had talked about having kind of two different overlay areas for the Thoreau Depot, the Sudbury Road section and then the Thoreau Street section. And with this new requirement, it starts to kind of make even more sense because you would not want, the Thoreau Street area, 15 units per acre, but it may be more appropriate for the Crosby Market site. So that's why we postponed so that he could get more guidance and come back. And he would be coming back the second meeting in March, which I think is the 23rd.
And so that means he'll probably help us formulate a bylaw,
correct.
for this or
Correct.
part of this. Right. Okay.
So I definitely
That's
think,
good timing.
yeah, it's very good timing. So, so that's why it was postponed. But I think some of the Thoreau Depot items where Chris has provided at the previous two meetings dealt with that mixed use and the affordable component, as well as getting consensus from the board that for mixed use developments where having currently it requires them business and residential to be in the same building, and getting consensus that in some cases it's very appropriate to have them separate, like what he proposed for the Thoreau Depot. And so just getting consensus so he can move forward on some of those items.
Thank you. That's helpful. Does anybody on the board have questions about this multifamily zoning and MBTA communities? Kind of what this means to us, or why it's coming to our attention now? I just want to make sure, since it's relatively new, obviously.
I have a question. I wasn't sure about what a 40R smart growth zoning district or a starter home zoning district would mean. Is that something that would have to be incorporated in this choice? And what are the implications of that versus the what we've discussed to date?
So what we've discussed to date is similar to 40Rs under Chapter 40. It's the Mass General Law under the Zoning Act, Chapter 40R, and it deals with communities who develop these districts that allow more density and mixed use developments or affordable housing choices, but it definitely primarily deals with allowing density and having affordable housing components in that district that makes the communities eligible for different types of grant funding or different other types of funding mechanisms through the state when communities actively have moved forward with these more dense zoning districts, especially, now they're focusing on multifamily within a half mile of transit. So it is something that MAPC is looking at, is also with the Thoreau Depot project.
So the multifamily in a reasonable area would be required, but then smart growth or starter home zoning would be something we could elect or not? Is that?
Correct. So from what I understand, so DHCD hasn't developed all of, the guidance documents yet, but from what I understand is that communities will have to have at least one area that allows the 15 units per acre by right, but that you can move forward with like a 40R smart growth district. And that would include, the affordable component. And when you do a 40R district, it opens communities up to make them eligible for other types of funding. Right after 40R is 40S, and it deals with communities getting additional funds to offset for schools. Because you've adopted a 40R district, the legislature, said, okay, well, it has to be family, housing. It can't be, deed restricted or age restricted. So they said, well, communities aren't going to do this because then they're going to have to absorb all the cost for schools. So after 40R is 40S, which helps to offset the school costs. But it sounds simple, but it is somewhat complicated. But I do know that MAPC, any legislation dealing with housing is more complicated. But I do know that he is looking at this, and with the new housing requirements in the bill, I think that's why they wanted to take a step back and see what DHCD was going to do.
So in terms of the planning board, is this something that are these things that we would consider as options to present to town meeting, or we could present multiple options, or this is something that would just be in the overall process for the thorough district where we'd get community feedback? How would we progress in adding these things or into what we've been considering so far?
So the next steps, when MAPC, when Chris comes back, the board, he hasn't presented things about, I think there were two other elements, parking and another element that he was going to come back and discuss with the board. Then he will move into the next phase, which will be another public, a broad public forum to present this, draft idea for the Thoreau depot. And from there, actual zoning, the community will provide their input on, the zoning that the planning board is looking and how to change the zoning. And then that will be developed into a warrant article for, hopefully a fall town meeting. But they aren't looking to develop a zoning that could be put, like in West Concord Village, or it is specifically only for the Thoreau Depot Business District.
Right.
Well,
Does West Concord qualify as it stands today under the new mass requirements for a transport center related? No, it's not
No.
dense enough.
No, I don't. There isn't any zoning in the community that's dense enough by right at 15 units per acre.
Thank you.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, are we going to have to do something like this in West Concord as well, because there's a station there?
No, I think from what I understand, what I'm reading, no, the bill is only by right. It has to be, one area. It doesn't have to be.
Even if you have like 2 train stops in your town.
Correct. Yeah, no, because I mean, there's some communities that have, 5 train stops in their town. But no, from what I understand, it's only one. It has to be in one location.
Elizabeth, can you remind me, what is the size of the Crosbys lot?
Off the top of my head,
If you don't know off the top of your head, don't worry about it. I was just,
I
I
don't know. I can.
was just trying to remember what that size was and what MAPC had already shown in terms of density for that one.
Yep. Give me 2 seconds and I can tell you.
I thought we were pretty close. For one of the demonstrations, we had more than 15 units, right? Am I remembering this wrong?
Oh, like as a proposal, right? As a,
Yeah.
this could be here
Yeah.
and still fit
Yeah.
with a height restriction.
So the just the Crosbys lot, and it doesn't is almost 4 acres, and then where like CVS, they're actually separate lots, but I think they're all under one ownership, is 1.5 acres, and then there's 2 smaller parcels, up front, which are total maybe a little less than another acre, so. So there's,
Okay.
there's definitely, there's the ability to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Elizabeth, it's some basic sort of regulatory questions. So they passed this law. To what degree do we need to adopt it and have our own, go to town meeting, or is these things become part of the regulation, the zoning bylaw that we operate under? Can you walk us through that?
The process to adopt to meet this requirement?
Well, so there are these various requirements that are in the law, and obviously the regulations we adopt are secondary or subservient to the law that the legislature passes. So I'm just wondering, are there affirmative steps that as a planning board we need to take to update our code to meet the legal requirements and present to that town meeting, or are those things automatically, those changes, new zoning requirements and essentially flowed down to our code that we operate under?
No, these requirements will require communities to amend their zoning bylaws in some fashion, whether it's changing zoning or doing overlay districts.
Right.
To meet the requirements. What DHCD will be doing is developing the guidance on which it says, 15 units per acre. So, they'll be saying, it can be, multifamily in, separate buildings or mixed use development. And so they'll be defining what those parameters are, but no, it will be up to communities to satisfy that requirement. And part of DHCD's guidance usually says, communities have, till, 3 years to do this. And then if you don't do it, you won't be eligible for any of these, any
Okay.
grants
That was my
or.
second question that you jumped to. So we don't have that timeline yet.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
But luckily we have, $40,000 grant from MAPC, who's currently basically doing what communities will have to do to change zoning unless they, towards the city, they may already have this. A lot of communities already have that. And some communities that have already adopted a 40R overlay district already have one area, but they may not all be MBTA communities. 40R isn't specific to MBTA communities.
okay.
It's something that any city or town can adopt.
And you may have already answered this, but the words on the screen suggested you have to have this for at least one of the areas within an MBTA stop. we have two, so would we need to adapt these to both of them, both of these districts?
No, it's my understanding, it specifically says, one reasonable area,
Okay,
because there's some communities that have, like four commuter rail, stops,
right,
or,
of course.
so that's why I think the language specifically says one reasonable area. So Marcia is also on this meeting and just texted me to give everybody a sense of proportion. We have Concord Green, which is 25 units on 10 acres. So that was under the
25 acres, 25 units per
Units per-
acre. So there are 250 units total in Concord Green.
oh yeah, your text says 25 units on 10 acres.
I left that
So it's 25 units per acre. And that was done under a garden. There used to be a quote, a garden
Right.
apartment bylaw. That's how that got developed. And then I think, Marcia, were you still here when it got taken away? No, I think that at that time there was community opposition to something that dense. And so that bylaw was deleted.
To be replaced with the PRD, actually. So that was mid 1970s.
Is the elevator version of this that we have our work cut out for us for 2022 town meeting, but we probably won't be putting forward new bylaws proposals for.
But it could be part of the special town meeting in the fall if it's part of this Thoreau Business District.
Correct.
I see. Right. Of course. Kristen, thank you. Okay.
And I mean, I guess the question, to your point, Burton, or might be we be ready to move it in this fall, or should we have everything lined up, but really, continue it until the next year, since we're going to have to do some education and things like that. And Linda, you have some?
I just had a question about West Concord. If you include the development Marcia mentioned, and then Christopher Heights, if that goes forward, then would West Concord then meet the density requirements?
No, because it has to be an existing provision in your zoning bylaw. It can't be an existing development. Concord Green was developed, in the late 60s, 70s. And Christopher Heights is an assisted living facility that was done under a comprehensive permit, which is a provision in Mass General Law that allows, if communities don't have 10% of their housing stock deed restricted at 80%, a developer can come in, propose a comprehensive permit, and it overrides all local zoning. So, a comprehensive permit has nothing to do with a community's zoning, because they can come in and override everything in it. So that's not something, that's not a by right. That's definitely not a by right development zoning in any community's zoning bylaw.
Am I am I thinking of this in an oversimplistic way? I mean, the way I'm taking it is that we just need to adopt that language and identify a parcel or parcels of land to set as a district that fits that language. Whether we say that's the Thoreau Depot as a whole or a subset of that,
Yep,
would be all we need to do, right?
correct. So I think that's why, MAPC is waiting, because all this work they have done is definitely looking at a zoning bylaw amendment that does allow greater density than is currently allowed. So I think it's just having them go back over what they are doing and, what they're proposing. Was it, 10 units, per acre? So they may just have to tweak something and so that it meets this new provision. I think it's, you know, our goal and MAPC's goal with all of this work, if zoning bylaw amendments for Thoreau Depot, which is the perfect location as far as under, you know, this new legislation and it being an MBTA community and, you know, less than half a mile from, you know, the train station, is the location to be able to do this. Their thought is just let's roll it into what we're doing. So let's take a step back for, you know, a month and make sure that we're on the right track. So when they get to the next step, as far as in, you know, beginning of summer to do, you know, some type of public forum, they can address both of these items.
Yeah, I think we've actually been quite fortunate that we were already working on this in some form or fashion, and then this happened. So,
And to clarify, the zoning bylaw wouldn't say we're putting in 15 units per acre. It would be the bylaw to allow that should, you know, a developer come forward, right? And then I guess the other question, and we don't really need to tackle it now because there's going to be some time, is I imagine this is going to be just one part of the proposal that we're putting forward for this whole district. Can the town vote that part down, you know, and propose an amendment? You know, it seems like if it's required, but you still have to have, you know, the town approve it.
So without getting the further guidance from DHCD and just, you know, reading the, you know, the legislation itself, I think, you know, what will happen is, I mean, the state can either develop legislation and, you know, pass a law like Chapter 40B that overrides all local zoning and says if you don't meet the 10% of affordable housing, a developer can come in and, you know, do a comprehensive permit. Or they develop like the economic development bill saying these are requirements that communities have to meet these requirements, but the state can't force a town to amend their zoning, go to town meeting and have town meeting adopt it. So I think what this current bill, you know, legislation says is that if you don't have this, then you won't get any, you're not eligible for any state grants. You won't be able to do a local project like the Assabet River pedestrian bridge and get transportation improvement program funding, or so I think that's how this legislation was approached.
All right. Well, thanks. I just wanted to make sure that kind of we were able to ask questions. That way, if there's anything for you to take back to Chris while he's doing his research, we can do that, and then we'll see him again in another month or so. Were there any other questions from the board about this particular aspect? Because we do want to just touch upon the consensus about the business district there, and then I would open it up for public comment just briefly to see if there's any other questions that folks have about this district area. And so Elizabeth, I think you reminded us that the couple of things that we have left were parking. We had affordable housing, and there's one more item, and that we kind of wanted to come to, was it height, building height that we wanted to come to agreement on?
Well, so MAPC, Chris has not presented his proposal for parking yet. I think that's going to be at the next meeting. So currently what he has.
I just want to make sure that if there's any guidance we should be offering now rather than having him go down one road and then us.
So in
while he's formulating it.
yeah, so in December he presented the one item. Currently, the bylaw says that a mixed-use development has to be, all in one building, and I think there was consensus that for, like larger lots, so like Crosbys, that having a separate residential building in the back and commercial in the front, it's a mixed-use development, but it's not all in one building. And then the question that I'm not sure there was complete consensus about was currently the mixed-use development requirement is for developments of 4 or more units, 20% must be affordable. And the recommendation was from MAPC is 15% of the units have to be affordable for projects of 8 or more. And then the third aspect that he went over was the open space requirement, which is currently 2 times the gross floor area of the residential portion, which it can be reduced by special permit. And based on their analysis, that can hinder proposed mixed-use development projects. And their open space for residential, they proposed 15% of the lot area, and that the open spaces be publicly accessible to the extent practical, and allow reduction through improvements to off-site open spaces within neighborhoods. So those were 3 of the items that I think Chris was looking for a consensus about.
So if we think that's fine, we can kind of nod our heads in consensus. If we want to see him change that, and then
So Kristen, your Wi-Fi is going in and out and you're currently frozen.
kind of formulate that now so we can give him that feedback.
So I think what Kristen wanted to do was to make sure there was consensus with the board so that Chris can move forward with developing this. So come the beginning of September, he can move forward with the public forum and the proposed, getting input on the proposed zoning. Linda.
I had a question. Was there any consideration in our formulations for the housing in the multifamily units as to whether it would be any requirements of size, that is numbers of bedrooms, like to be more family friendly, or could a developer have all just, studio, 1, few 2 bedrooms? Where do we stand on that, or do we need to take a position on that?
I don't think he has developed the actual bylaw to that level of detail yet, but it is definitely something that the board can have a conversation about and can develop into the bylaw. I think that is definitely something that we'll wait till we get DHCD guidance on. Because if it comes back and says, yes, 15 units per acre, that is, family housing, percentage has to be this, and this, that's just what we just don't know yet. What level of specificity DHCD is going to come back on defining what the requirements are. But yes, that's something that, the board can discuss and program into the bylaw if that seems to work.
Thank you. I did hear all that. I'm sorry that I was muted and stuff, but that was what I was hoping. Linda, good question. Are there any other questions from the board or guidance for us to consider different directions. I mean, otherwise he's going to kind of continue with that proposal, which could be just fine. And then we would, you know, get some feedback from the public as well. But any other thoughts from board members? Okay, let's open it up to public comment about this. And again, we're not necessarily discussing the whole Thoreau business district, but you know, if you have any questions on kind of what we've just been discussing now, or information that you'd like to keep in mind, please raise your hand. Then we will promote you so that you'll be able to unmute yourself and then state your name and address for the record. And we will start with Susan Bates, please.
Thank you. Yeah, my question was, if this new legislation kind of gets incorporated into the Crosby area, isn't it still all contingent upon whether or not the owners want to sell the land for this purpose?
Let me interrupt you just for a moment. Could you state your name and record and your address?
I'm sorry, Susan Bates, 28 Concord Green, number 6.
Okay.
And
Thank
I'm
you.
the Select Board Liaison. My question was, given this new legislation and what you're talking about with the 25, or how many units an acre, 15 units per
15.
acre within a half a mile of the train station, that would be a site that would seem suited for it, where Crosby's and CVS is. But my question is, wouldn't the owners of the property have the right to do this or not do this? Is that correct?
Right. This would just be the zoning that would allow it.
Okay.
Should the developers choose to, or whomever owns that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. If there are other questions, please raise your hand. And I don't see any other hands up right now. And so that was kind of what I wanted to make sure that we were kind of reading and thinking about, so that we're prepared to ask questions for Chris, or, you know, if we'd ask Elizabeth to do any research for us, we could at least provide some specific guidance. So thank you, Elizabeth. So I think we are on to our warrant articles, of which you have also been working very hard on and providing some drafts. Where would you like to start?
I will start with two updates. One is the Floodplain Conservancy District. This morning I did get comments back from the state floodplain coordinator, and wow, there's a lot. There are quite a bit of changes, even to the draft bylaw that the board received. So we're trying to set up a meeting with myself, the natural resources director, the town engineer, the assistant town engineer, and the building commissioner for Friday morning to go over all of her comments and questions and recommended changes. I think the changes to the bylaw themselves will appear, you know, very significant. And what I think is going to have to be made just repeated over and over and over again is that these requirements are federal required changes that communities are being, to Burton's previous question, are being mandated to make. If you do not make these changes, then communities will no longer be in the National Flood Insurance Program, and property owners will no longer be eligible to purchase flood insurance. So I think that's just something that because some of them, they're, I've talked about it with town staff. Some of them don't, for how Concord handles their zoning, don't seem to be appropriate to be in the zoning bylaw. But what FEMA and the state have done is develop this model bylaw for, there's 351 communities, cities and towns in the Commonwealth. Some of them don't have any professional staff. They have a part-time building commissioner who has to, enforce this, and he's shared with 3 other communities. So it's a bylaw that was developed to encompass everything. So some of the things that they're requiring to be put in there, they're gonna generate questions, and we'll be able to answer them. It's, why is that in there? Well, because, FEMA's requirements, state that you have to have this provision in there, and doesn't make it good or bad. It's just a requirement. And so hopefully we'll be meeting on Friday, and I'll have a revised draft for the board for your next meeting.
Thank you. So that one's going to be that comprehensive long one, but it's not necessarily going to have anything controversial in it. It's just going to be very full of changes, and we are just going to need to explain that rationale, which seems pretty straightforward though.
Correct.
Okay.
And
Well, thank you
Elizabeth,
for working on that.
I'm sorry, Kristen. Same question as before, I guess, or related. Our timeline for doing that? Well, first of all, that's all driven by the reassessment of the 100-year floodplain. Is that correct? With changes that come along with?
No.
No. Okay, so it's just new FEMA stuff.
Yes.
And our timeline for getting that into the zoning bylaw is that our next annual town meeting, or is it 2022?
No, so the draft bylaw that the floodplain coordinator just reviewed is one that, intended to put for this town meeting for 2021, annual town meeting 2021, which I still think we can do it. Just need to iron out, a couple of things. But we received another email this morning that because the planning board has been doing this work well in advance. I mean, the minute we were notified that this was happening, town staff basically started looking at the model bylaw and how it was, how it was going to be put into amend our current bylaw. So I was able to get it to the floodplain coordinator 2 weeks ago. And we got an email this afternoon from her that says they will currently not be looking at any more communities bylaws because there's far too many. And right now they will only be reviewing communities that are required to adopt new maps. So if there was any floodplain changes or new maps, those communities will need to adopt them basically now. And communities that don't have to adopt any type of new maps will be required at their next available town meeting. And then there's a third community, which I don't know how this part works, but I guess there's certain communities where FEMA goes out and evaluates your floodplain bylaws and procedures. I don't know if that's based on too many flood insurance claims or something that's triggering them going out to evaluate a community's bylaws. Those communities will, if they come out to evaluate your bylaws, you have to be going through the process of updating. So we're not a community that is required to do this immediately, but because town staff was aware of this, I think it was in October, we started moving towards looking at this. So I still think the board can present something for this annual town meeting. It's gonna just take at least another few weeks. Oh. So we
That's good.
can't hear you any longer, Kristen. But I'll continue with my update. Working with the Concord Public Works and Water and Sewer, they were looking at providing some potential amendments to the Groundwater Conservancy District. And I spoke to the Public Works Director today, and his staff is still trying to pull together. It's not going to be anything major, just a couple of other amendments in there to address water quantity potential impacts. And he said he hopes to have something to the board by the end of next week. So I did tell him there's only 3 more planning board meetings before the warrant closes. So he said, he'll get something to the board, but if it turns out to be something more elaborate than, because he does understand the board does start your bylaw amendment discussions months and months ago. He said this isn't a critical bylaw amendment, and if it needs to wait, that's fine as well. So that's the update on that one.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So for perspective, there's about five warrant articles that we're talking about. Elizabeth's just covered 2 of those, and those are the ones that, for sure we have less to do with, but we are going to just help and make sure that they're as clean as possible and that we have reviewed them and understand them. The third one is the 2-family bylaw. Then there's one about earth removal and fill, and the tree, and then the tree bylaw. So those are the 5 that we've been talking about, and then we're going to talk about one more thing tonight. But so the 2-family bylaw has been drafted. We wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that. There's some good questions about it, just to make sure we're that's still doing what we intend. And then the earth removal bylaw, Elizabeth sent a draft around also. So we want to kind of go through those proposed changes and see if that's going in the right direction, or if we need to offer feedback. So similarly, the tree bylaw, which is probably the more straightforward of those. So do you want to go to the tree bylaw next and kind of show us your marked up changes? Then we'll give you feedback on that, and then maybe we could do the 2-family and then earth removal.
Linda did provide a couple of comments and also pointed out that when I did the cut and paste to create this, it changed all my bulleting numbers for me. So the copy that the board got, I think this says 5.1, and this one says 5.2, and that's not the correct sections. And then Linda, my version, talking with the reviewing agent, only had this first sentence, and Linda suggested the second sentence, just to clarify that, it's, every 12 months, because there are some construction projects that are very, very lengthy. And then there was a typo that said because, and it should be become.
So you're showing us everything you've highlighted are the proposed changes, right, that we would be making?
From the draft that the board got, yes.
But what about like the total changes?
This is it. These are the only 3 changes to the tree bylaw. There were other changes to the rules and regulations, but that doesn't require town meeting approval. That just requires a public hearing. But these are the only 3 changes to the actual bylaw. Other item that Linda brought up, and I'll let her, I'll let Linda ask the question, and it dealt with the definition of a protected tree, which I'll bring that up in a second, Linda.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I have too many things open. There we go. So go ahead, Linda.
Oh, okay, well, I believe the existing definition of protected tree indicates that invasive species are not protected. And then at our meeting with Davy Tree, they spoke more to the point of protecting the canopy, independent of whether the tree was an invasive species or not. And so the question is, should protected trees include invasive species, and that what we're trying to do is protect the canopy? Or, if you have a full yard of Norway maples, is it really something that shouldn't be in consideration in terms of the activity in construction? Is that a fair statement, Elizabeth?
It's in my conversations with the reviewing agent. So there is a distinction when you have under the bylaw, when you have a protected tree and it's a capital P, or you want to protect a tree. And what Davy Tree has experienced is there have been some projects where there is an invasive tree, but the property owner doesn't want to remove it and doesn't want it damaged during construction. Currently, how the bylaw is written, I mean, not the bylaw, the rules and regs are written is that they can keep the tree, but there's no requirement that any protection be put around the tree during construction. And Davy Tree's recommendation was that, if somebody wants to, keep the tree, they should also, want to put protection fencing around it so that it's not, damaged during construction. Because their point is if in some instances you can, remove an invasive, but it may then impact, an oak tree that is considered a protected tree under the bylaw, capital P. It's in the setbacks, and so the reviewing agent may have looked at the removal of that invasive and the impact on the oak tree and said, well, by removing this and doing what you're doing, that oak tree now won't survive, and they would have to mitigate it. The issue with the definition and taking out the sentence regarding invasives is that now any tree that's greater than 6 inches DBH now becomes a protected tree. And the intent when the the tree protection subcommittee and the conversations with the planning board when the bylaw was developed, and working with natural resources, was that there is this benefit of not requiring somebody to have to mitigate an invasive tree, because the point was, if somebody is allowed to remove an invasive, hopefully they'll plant something else, that's a non-invasive or native tree, and didn't necessarily wanted to penalize people for wanting to remove an invasive tree. So that's why that sentence was included in the definition.
That's a tough call.
But
Linda, thanks for
Yeah.
bringing it up.
Yeah, it really is it's a tough call when you're talking about, others have brought up all trees, serve a purpose as far as, canopy and it really is a tough call as far as balance. Yes, all trees have, a great benefit, but there are now certain areas where native trees are being completely, forced out by, invasive trees. And once you force out a certain, natural native habitat, then you start affecting, other parts of a whole ecosystem, not just, tree canopy and carbon, sequestration. It's, now it gets down to, insects or birds or
Yeah.
things. So.
I mean, that's such a challenge, because what we have heard when people come before us and they propose wiping away so many trees is, well, those are just invasive anyway. So we're so we know we're seeing that side of things. That's not the positive side of what was intended here.
Kristen,
So yeah, go ahead, Burton.
on the other hand, I know, a little bit of the history here is that there was a subcommittee that the planning board had to consider the tree bylaw, and there was a lot of discussion about the scope of whether it should cover all trees or native trees. And we, at the time, benefited greatly from having a landscape architect on the planning board who provided a lot of insight on this, and really, I think, took the lead on this. And at the end of the day, I would say that the subcommittee that was tasked with coming up with a tree bylaw was not able to reach consensus. And I don't know if it was over this issue, but they were not able to reach consensus. So the planning board sort of took back the discussion and came out with this bylaw with the very able, this is a wonderful thing about being in Concord and on the planning board, we had a excellent landscape architect who was very familiar with these issues. And we have something that that focuses on protecting native species and not on protecting the canopy, regardless of the species. And I think that if you were to talk to the director of, where's my brain? The
Natural Resources Commission.
Natural Resources. Thank you. They would be in agreement with this. And while there will certainly be the case where a specimen Norway maple tree is taken down, I think overall the focus of the bylaw was to protect the native tree canopy. So I just bring that all up to say there was so much discussion, so much input from very informed people, and there was looking at what other towns had done, and there have been some people that say we should protect all trees. The focus should be on greenhouse gas mitigation, or it should be on preserving the canopy for the canopy's sake. But I think the consensus came out, and I think it's in a good place. And I say that as a non-tree expert. I want to be clear. Thank you, Kristen.
I appreciate the historical perspective. So Linda, I think that was, a good point that you made, hearing what Burton says, any other thoughts or, from the other folks on the committee too.
No, I'm fine with that. I just wasn't aware of the history one. And then I wanted to make sure that with the change in the second paragraph on the protected trees, that there wasn't any discord between that and the definition of protected tree, because I didn't really understand how they worked together.
Okay, Haley, Nathan, or Alan, any comments or questions or clarifications?
No, I don't have any. I would just, I guess sort of agree with what Barton was saying in terms of my understanding and always the way I've viewed it is that it was to protect. Now I just drew a blank.
Native.
Thank you. To protect the native species and not the canopy as a whole.
To Linda's question on the bylaw, it deals with the second part where the reviewing agent added under maintenance of protected and replanted trees, added the sentence, if an invasive tree is to remain on the property within the setback areas, the protection must be the same as other trees being protected under the bylaw to prevent these trees from becoming a hazard. So that was the example the reviewing agent gave is somebody says, well, that's a really nice Norway maple and I know it's invasive, but we're going to keep it, but I don't want to put any protection fencing around it. And then, so what happens is, during construction, without the fencing, whether it's trenching or footings or, whatever they go through and, rip up a main, feeder trunk. And what has happened is that, and then that tree after a couple of years becomes a hazard tree. And, that's where you get into, whether it's property damage or, God forbid something even worse, or in a couple of years, that tree becomes a hazard and there's a beautiful oak behind it and that tree, goes into the oak and completely, destroys the oak, and the oak ends up having to be removed because you didn't have any protection around this tree that you, even though it was invasive, could have been protected to keep all of that from happening. So that was the reviewing agent's point to that sentence.
I have another question. Maybe someone can give me a little historic context for, and that is the elimination of subdivisions under the tree protection. Why that was made, and is that something we should or could reconsider?
How could we do that? Because that is something that comes up all the time. There was the determination to not include subdivisions. Why? What is there a simple way to remind us about that?
I would. So the simplest way is when you think about a subdivision, and currently under the subdivision rules and regs, you have a 50. The requirement is a 50-foot wide road right of way, and whether it's 22 feet of pavement, and then the town requires all utilities to be underground. To lay all that out, it's a requirement of your subdivision rules and regs, and to have that requirement, but then say, oh, and even though we're requiring you to have 22 feet of pavement and a 50-foot road right of way, we're going to penalize you because there's trees in that area and you now have to mitigate them. I think there's better ways to address that issue under your subdivision rules and regs, and not through the tree protection bylaw. The tree protection bylaw was specifically, the subcommittee was specifically set up to address individual building lots and not subdivisions. By their sheer nature, subdivisions, you have to clear, a
The
lot of
road.
area to build a subdivision. This was developers coming in and through the approval not required process, finding an oversized lot with, extra frontage, and then coming in and, buying that property, demolishing a perfectly good house, dividing the property, and then clearing every single tree. And that was the original reason that the subcommittee was formed and this bylaw was written, was to address residential single lot developments and not subdivisions.
And Elizabeth, if I may add to that, as a planning board, our authority is only as is constrained by the scope of the subdivision control law, and regulations that are contravention or add additional burdens on somebody that wants to create a subdivision, you may or may not be allowable, but approved by the Attorney General's office, right? And within the scope of the subdivision control law, in part because it's quite it's something frankly from a prior time, doesn't take into consideration tree preservation. Now, we did also exclude, and this was, Linda, right as I was coming on the planning board, so I wasn't really part of this, but I was a little bit of a fly on the wall. We did exclude PRDs as well, where we do have much more flexibility in terms of additional requirements that may be had. But the idea, the reason that the PRDs were not part of it is because we generally review the whole, landscape plan and site plan and the like, and get a chance to look at it from that perspective, rather than maybe the somewhat more crude approach of saying this tree has to stay versus, and there's a penalty associated with it. When with a PRD, you might come up with something that's more, reflective of the overall site design. But it's important to remember that we've got to live within the scope of the subdivision control law when it comes to restrictions that we might be able to place on subdivisions. Of course, any individual lot, as we know from our recent discussions, any individual lot on that subdivision that is not cleared of trees as part of the grading that's required for the subdivision, then that comes into play as to whether the tree preservation bylaw applies to that lot.
Sorry if I missed this, but was our tree preservation bylaw previously including subdivisions, and that had been approved by the AG, and now we're proposing to just take it out, or?
No. There hasn't been a change to our bylaw, to the tree preservation bylaw as a result. No.
The tree preservation bylaw was new, right? That
Yes.
was so there wasn't one before it was introduced, and it specifically did not include subdivisions for the reason we just heard.
Right. And as Elizabeth said, it was really going towards the teardowns or the lots where it was in an established neighborhood where a developer would come in and clear to the lot lines. Subdivision is really a whole different, it's a different ball game in terms of the considerations that are coming into play.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. I would just say, like, if we thought that it would be allowable by the AG, we keep hearing that we have such little authority to regulate under the subdivision bylaw. But if there is precedent for it, I certainly would be in favor of including subdivisions in that. I mean, it's their decision to do a subdivision. So I don't know. I don't know what precedent there is, but I see no reason not to include it.
So,
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
to Burton's point, property owners under subdivision control law have an inherent right to subdivide their property. So that's why there are limitations set forth in subdivision control law that specifically prevents communities from enacting provisions that basically take away that right. So, every
Yeah, it's
property
not taking
has
away
a
their right though, but it is, I guess, asking for,
Well,
compensation.
and until somebody finally gets the legislature to, look at how long it's taken them to update the, State Zoning Act, the subdivision control law is just as bad. And, there's been years and years and years of legislation being, put forth that never gets anywhere because, there's a strong contingency that currently the subdivision control law is not a balanced, in my professional opinion, a balanced law between property owners' rights and, communities' rights or, citizens' desires to, how their communities get developed. It's been established under the law and by the courts. I feel it does favor, that property right ability to subdivide your property.
I would second that, Elizabeth. I mean, it's very clear, Haley, if you go and read the preamble to the law itself and the extensive guidance it's put out on for planning boards and others to interpret the law, that it's designed to snowplow through any kind of NIMBYism and whatnot and allow people to build houses. And it's maybe from a different time where the emphasis was on, there was a lot more land and people were a lot less focused on conservation. And it's clearly designed to allow people to come in once they've acquired land and build houses, so long as they've got drainage on the streets that works and fire trucks can get down the roads. I mean, that's essentially it. And
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with any of that. I'm just saying, I don't know the history to how it got in I'm not even looking at the draft, but like, it sounds like it was in there and we're saying it should be struck, but I'm just saying if there was like rationale for it being in there in the first place, if we think there's precedent, like.
I don't think it was ever in there. I don't think that in the tree preservation bylaw, there was ever anything about subdivisions. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, or maybe I just missed what Linda said. I thought she said she saw.
No, I think she was bringing it up because I think we had asked about this, or, like it had come up, like why doesn't, or public had said, why doesn't it apply? And so it's been helpful, I think, for me, because, similar to Burton, about when I came on, that historical reminder about what the deliberation was at the time. I think that's useful information. And related to subdivision rules and regulations, we know that we are overdue for updating ours. And then it's
sorry about that. I thought
no,
Linda
that's
had said
okay.
it was struck.
Oh no, it's all right. And so just to kind of close the loop on that, we certainly want to do that. It is in the cards. It is going to be a very staff intensive update. And then what we're hoping to do is ask the town manager to set aside money so that we can work with a consultant and town council when we make the edits to our rules and regulations, and hopefully to give us more language to more objectively evaluate things like natural resources, preservation of natural resources, things like that. So I think that's what maybe Elizabeth meant when she was saying that could be a way to address the tree preservation, but within the rules and regulations of the subdivision control law, rather than making the tree preservation bylaw apply somewhere where it probably wouldn't be allowed.
So there's other ways to address that under subdivision control law, and And, you know, I don't feel trying to address anything in a subdivision is appropriate to try and address it in some other bylaw. If you want to address something in subdivision, you address that in your subdivision rules and regs. So there's other things to look at that time. You know, maybe, you know, a 50-foot right of way, you know, isn't needed any longer, you know, or, you know, why was it established, you know, when it was established, and maybe it can be, you know, a 40-foot right of way, or maybe you leave it at 50 feet and look at reducing pavement and, you know, a sidewalk on one, you know, side, but have the grass strip between, you know, the curb line and the sidewalk be, you know, a minimum of 5 feet. Or I think about some of the streets, you know, my family had in Wisconsin, where it, you know, it's the road, and then you know, it's not a grass strip. It's, you know, it's like a parkway. It's like 10 feet of, you know, grass and trees before you get to the sidewalk. So there's other ways to look at, you know, addressing that in your subdivision rules and regs.
Good discussion, though. I mean, I think it's important to kind of, especially for newer members, to bring up questions, or for those of us who weren't around when something was brought up. I think it's always good to revisit kind of the purpose, and are we still meeting the intention of it? So thank you.
And Kristen, before you move on from that, what I will do is I'll write myself a note, and the report that the tree preservation subcommittee did, you know, we still have, so I can send that around to everybody just to kind of, you know, familiar, because it was like a 2-year process.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Any other questions, comments about those kind of relatively small changes proposed to the tree preservation bylaw? And thanks, Linda, for your addition. Go ahead, Linda.
This is just a suggestion. I went online and tried to look at the American National Standards Institute data, but I found it had to be you had to pay for it. So I just wondered if the planning board has a copy of that contractors or whatever people could, and citizens could access without, I don't even know what the charge was. I just looked at it and I said, oh, I'm not paying for it. I just wondered what was in it. But it just as this, maybe the library could have a copy for.
You know what, let me check with Natural Resources. They probably have a copy. I mean, I believe it is a copyrighted document, but so I don't think it's something that we can post on the webpage, but at least we can, Natural Resources may have it. Additionally, I know that Marcia is a landscape architect and is a member of the American Society of Landscape Architects. So she may have, you know, the ability to also get that document, but I will check both of those. That's a good suggestion.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to the 2-family bylaw. And again, this was drafted and ready to go for last year. But let's take a look at it and make sure that it still says what we want it to say in light of kind of just different things that have happened in the last year.
So that is, oh, I'm not muted. So that is the paragraph change to amend the bylaw to allow 2-family by special permit in the resident C zone district.
And so remember, we've had the 2-family bylaw. That part isn't new. We're proposing to add this part about residency, and then separately we did the bylaw for the additional dwelling unit next year. Burton?
I was just going to ask, so Elizabeth, taking into account the new law, would the two-family bylaw, if we had it in zoning districts that were adjacent to the MBTA stations, would that law require it to be by right or by special permit? And would that, actually, let me back up. Would that mean an element of what the new law's requirements are is allowing two-family districts, two-family houses by right? Is that, I'm sorry, that was very muddled, wasn't it? So let me back up.
So I'm not, I mean, so a two-family in residence C would not meet the 15 unit per acre threshold.
Okay, so totally different.
Yeah, it wouldn't meet that threshold. There may be another provision, I would have to look in more detail, yeah, I don't know exactly if this particular bylaw amendment meets a specific criteria in the new legislation. I'd have to look.
In full transparency, the reason I asked the question is I know when we looked at this last year, we talked about whether it should be right or by right, or it should be by special permit. And at the time, the consensus was very clearly it should be by a special permit. This is a new thing. We want to keep an eye on this. And I was just wondering if we would be able to meet the requirements of the new law if we change the review. I would still be very much in favor of this being by special permit, but I'm just wondering if, you know, as we look at the law coming down the pike, that's why I asked the question. So.
I think the discussion, this was something that, you know, Hallie raised, and she can ask this question. I think I outlined her question in the agenda memo, was the her observation in other communities where you have a two-family dwelling that's going on the market that may have, you know, maybe condoized and sold individually, and each one is being sold for over $1 million. And I don't think that's the initial reason that the board was proposing this. You know, it was hoping that there would be smaller units. And the question was raised whether the board wants to look at amending this to, such as you did with the accessory dwelling unit, propose a limitation on the square footage if it is a two-family. What the special permit process does is that, you know, there's the requirements that the Zoning Board of Appeals, when they issue a special permit, have to be met, and some, you know, those deal with, you know, neighborhood compatibility and, you know, other criteria for a special permit. But the question was raised whether the board wants to consider also looking at limiting the square footage.
So I have a quick question before we discuss that. Why were we allowed to limit the square footage of the additional dwelling unit and potentially a two-family home, but not a single-family home?
So that's it. It's not, you can the floor area ratio limits the square footage of a single family dwelling. The state zoning act is that a town cannot regulate the interior of a dwelling. You can't say you can only, you know, if you have a single family dwelling, you can only have one bathroom. You can't have, you know, this type of area in your house, and you can only have 2 bedrooms and a kitchen of, you know, 50 square feet. You can't regulate the interior of a single family dwelling. But
I thought we couldn't regulate the square footage and cap it at a certain size.
But that's what your floor area ratio does.
No, I mean, we could. Why couldn't we do an absolute like we did with the, you know, with the additional dwelling unit? And not to get too far off on that, because I know we're not discussing the floor area ratio tonight. We're going to do that another night. I'm just thinking about more for comparisons.
So one, I mean, you have a floor area ratio for all the 4 residential districts. And so you basically do regulate the size. You could lower the floor area ratio to where it's,
Until it caps at a certain, okay.
would that pass town meeting? Probably not.
Okay, I guess I was under the impression that the strict, you can't build a house over this wasn't allowed. Okay, so we don't have to go down that road anymore. So
Yeah, no,
getting back to your question about this is the more important part.
yeah, the law is that you can't regulate the interior of a dwelling.
Okay. And
just to be,
go ahead.
I was saying, just to be clear, the floor area ratio does not apply to a 2-family as a whole, right? It would be,
No, it does.
okay, so then wouldn't that be our automatic sort of cutoff then? Like what we need to,
So that gets back to the ongoing discussion about the floor area ratio. In the Residence C zone district, it's 10,000 square feet is the minimum lot size, but there's lots in the Residence C zone district that are 15 or 20,000 square feet. And when you do the floor area ratio calculation, that could be a 6,000-7,000 square feet. So you could have a 2-family that has 2,000-3,000 square foot dwellings in the Residence C zone district, and I'm not sure that meets, that is what what Helly was pointing out meets, the intention was, hopefully that you had, a 4,000 square foot 2-family dwelling with 2,000 square foot, where the price point would be, much more south of $1 million.
so I guess my take on this is that, as you were saying earlier, Elizabeth, they're two different, or maybe it was Kristen was saying, I mean, these are two different things. I think I would be hesitant to put a cap via FAR or something else on the 2 families when we can sort of address that by addressing the FAR. So if the issue is 2 big houses, houses that are too big, that's true for a single family or for a 2-family in this scenario. So why would we try to address it once in the 2-family bylaw and again in the FAR? Let's just worry about that in the FAR and leave it out of the 2-family, so that the 2-family just tracks along with whatever the single families are doing.
Yeah, but the FAR is just like a whole bigger nut to crack in general. I don't know.
Right, but the other thing you have to keep in mind is we're trying to incentivize builders to do 2 families. So if you all of a sudden put this other restriction on 2 families, that's going to force them to be smaller than a single family they could build on the same place. They're going to do the single family every time, as big as they, well, not necessarily as big as they can, but to whatever size they want to do. So I think if you track those 2 together, then that's probably the better way to go about it. And also just to if the goal is to make the 2 families sort of fit in with the surrounding Residence C community, then that seems to be the better way to go.
So I think I think the discussion kind of evolves now to a 2-family. It's they're would require 4 parking spaces, and so what gets built on that property may just inherently be larger because there's, for some reason, builders think every person has to have a garage, which we know where Burton lives, that's not true. But that concept hasn't reached the Main Street developers yet. And already, the planning board is having, this conversation and researching into the floor area ratio bylaw and whether it's working, because concerns and questions have been raised is it doing enough based on, the the, buildings that are being, the dwellings that are being built. So do you move forward with the 2-family bylaw before you address the floor area ratio requirement? Or do you wait and you address them at the same time so that there now isn't this, this lag or disparity at that time of you're going to have, a year where very large 2 families are going to be built or single family dwellings until the FAR, is researched and the board develops, something different. So that's where I see you either, include something to, to limited 2-family or not, or you wait to put forth the 2-family bylaw when you want to amend the floor area ratio.
I think they should go hand in hand, the 2-family and the FAR, because it's very reasonable to assume that a 2-family house needs to be a higher square footage than a single family. Like even if okay, we're looking at the character of the place, it doesn't necessarily need to be twice the size of a single family, but it needs to be larger than a single family, a 2-family dwelling. So basically we need to give some release for the FAR if there's a 2-family on the same lot. So I think that's how we can incentivize developers to do 2-family in the same lot rather than, because they will never do same square footage 2-family. They will rather do single family because they're selling per square foot. Why would they put 2 kitchens and 2? It just doubles the cost for they won't have incentive to do 2-family if we give the same FAR restrictions. So I think they should go hand in hand, but that's a different discussion, I guess.
This is a good one.
No,
No, I appreciate
perfect
this.
discussion. It's the perfect discussion for tonight because you either put forth the warrant article in a month and a half before the warrant closes, or you don't.
Mm-hmm. And we, like you're saying, we still have time to decide. This one is written, and if we want to make some small changes to it, we still have time. And Kate is working on some data crunching about the effectiveness of the FAR bylaw and any potential proposals for changing that. So I think we're slated to have that discussion next time, and so we can most definitely loop this 2-family back in. So this does not have to be the end of this. We don't have to agree on proposing this, but Haley, I appreciate you bringing this up. This is an important part because for all of these bylaws, we got to think about what the purpose is, and the purpose was to create more diverse housing. Which Elizabeth's got we've got all these bullet points there for the purpose of how we were trying to use this to create smaller and in theory more affordable housing, and not just 2 large ones that go for the same price that nobody can afford. So other questions or comments from the board on 2-family before we go to earth removal and fill? All right, so let's bring this one back when we have the FAR discussion, if you can. And then Elizabeth, thank you for drafting the earth removal, the changes to the earth removal. Haley did some research and had kind of proposed some suggested language that Elizabeth blended into our existing one, including the changes that we were proposing to add fill, where we have removal. Are you going to show that on your screen?
Can everybody see that?
Yes, thank you.
So the changes that the board had discussed at the last meeting had been incorporated, as your previous warrant articles. Bold and italics is the new sections. So I don't know, Haley, if you want to you want to speak to this or?
Yeah, no, I mean, it looks good to me. I think, you know, a lot of this, again, comes from several other town bylaws. So, you know, we talked about adding the sort of overall purpose of the earth removal and fill. That's pretty straightforward, I think.
Oh, I can't.
Your voice keeps coming in and out.
Oh, mine?
Yeah, as if you're
Oh.
moving away, but we're not seeing you move away from your microphone.
Sorry. Is that better?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just saying, I mean, nothing new here, obviously, from last time we talked. So pretty simple and straightforward, hopefully, additions or suggestions. And I think, you know, again, Elizabeth, tell me if I'm wrong, but most of all this language just is lifted from other existing bylaws from other
Right.
towns.
Yeah. So as Haley said, incorporating a purpose, there wasn't, a general purpose statement, which is, that's consistent with other sections in the zoning bylaw. And then this was more of a formatting. It does make it easier to read. And then there's the alternative analysis, which I did end up sending an email to the planner in Plymouth, where I think that's where you got this section from, if I'm not mistaken. And they have not yet had a project come in and provide an alternative analysis yet. So she couldn't give me any feedback on how it was working. So that was the one section. And then
So did she mention it? Was that a pretty new addition?
It must be. I sent her an email asking her if there have been any projects submitted under the bylaw, and she hasn't responded. But if nobody has provided an alternative analysis, I'm going to assume that I don't know what the threshold of their bylaw is. It may be a much higher threshold than 1,000 cubic yards. So, but I'll keep reaching out to her. And then and then the last statement, which I think was lifted from a couple other communities. So what the board hasn't drafted yet would be your explanation. So I don't know if you want to try to draft that on the fly, or if somebody wants to volunteer to put something together. But what I was going to touch base with Marcia and see if we can make a request to the town manager that these draft bylaws be submitted to town council before the warrant closes, so that if there are changes, they can be incorporated before the warrant closes. And actually what I would probably do is ask that, if we can get town council's review before your March 23rd meeting, that would be ideal. So that's something that I'll be looking into tomorrow.
So Elizabeth, I just have one general comment and a couple particular comments on the changes. First of all, I think it makes absolute sense that it's removal or filling, since I think the impact on the community is of the same degree. That additional provision, if you scroll up a little bit, that added in there, that D, alternatives analysis, I would suggest that it say minimize the amount of earth removed or filled, because we're essentially, that's the scope of the changes we're making. The general comment is that one of the things we heard a lot about in recent discussions of concerns around earth removal was the greenhouse gas and environmental impact of removing established, I guess, ground cover. I'm not an expert on this. And I wonder if maybe some of the people, Haley or others, might be thinking in terms of the intro paragraph, which I think is really good up at the top, whether that should be an element that we can take, should expressly be stated, should be taken into consideration, so as not to create excessive dust, washouts, traffic, or impact on the town's climate change goals. Now, the drawback to including that is, as a planning board, I think we can readily admit we don't have the resources, tools, or whatnot to measure directly the impact, the climate change impact, or climate impact of any particular earth removal project. On the other hand, it does state, sort of the elements to which we can take into consideration, and that was one of the things that many or a few recent public comments in other matters have raised around earth removal. Just my thoughts. But thank you.
To clarify, you mean that the ZBA would take into consideration, because there would be the ones.
Thank you for
Okay,
keeping me on the straight and narrow. Yes, Kristen,
Okay.
ZBA, not the
All right,
planning board.
but I mean, that's, your points are all,
Thank you.
well taken.
Yeah.
That's always the issue, right? Is how do we objectively,
Yeah,
make
and
this-
again, I think that's where,
Town council?
include those, include those statements, and then specifically, draw that question to town council, because I'm not sure that the State Zoning Act is, is advanced as, Concord wants to be. And it may not, that may be something that, you specifically cannot, put into zoning yet, or try and address through zoning.
And that's my caveat, Elizabeth. I just wanted to reflect that was, as we describe a purpose, as we input a purpose as to what our consideration should be, that's been a general theme that we've heard. Now, whether it fits within the scope of what we can do, I don't know. On the other hand, my other comment about down below, the captured the edit, I think that's not a lofty thing. That's
Right. But let's capture what you're saying here is where could we put that, that, it is going to be measured by this.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Linda.
Could you put, the purpose of this section is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public and of the environment by regulating? Just add it up there, public and environment.
I think that's probably a good, puts people on notice, but at the same time, it doesn't provide a strict standard, which might be in contravention of the general laws.
I think after traffic, you can, and so maybe it's, it's air quality, and maybe town council can help come up with, it kind of goes back to previous conversations on other, other projects, measurable items for when you are, when the board is considering, what is a measurable standard? What is, so is there already a standard for what, what is considered excessive dust, excessive, air quality, or so maybe that's a good question for town council is, whether that standard, whether there are standards that have already been developed that can be used when evaluating these projects. I think that definitely needs to be a key item of when you're thinking about developing these types of bylaw amendments. It's not just developing the words, it's providing the criteria that allows for the evaluation of the bylaw and the the creation of a defensible decision, whether it's for approval, or denial. That's the goal as far as, staff and how we support the planning board or the zoning board of appeals is, making really good and defensible decisions. And the bylaw needs to provide that criteria and ability to analyze projects that come before them. So that would be my question for council.
Well, that, and how is the discretion of the board, how is the board able to take into account public comment and and use their discretion within that objective analysis? I think that's kind of been our issue is if bylaws are purposely written with a little bit broad, with some leeway for that reason, what happens when the board tries to exercise its discretion in its interpretation? It doesn't seem like it works. So finding that balance, I think, is really important. So yeah, so thank you for those additions to the purpose. The purpose, I think, was just lifted from somebody else's, so that can most definitely be crafted more specifically. And then Elizabeth, do you think it's worth inserting another criterion somewhere within here so we don't lose that idea, even if it's not the exact wording that we're going to use?
Yeah, I guess it would just where would it go? So let me, I'll think on it, and Marcia and I can brainstorm. Usually when we put our heads together, you get one complete planner. So it's usually always a good discussion. And maybe town council, if we can get this to them early enough, maybe they will have some really suggestions.
Well, I mean, I appreciate you putting that request in, ahead of time, and I think we're working to make sure that we're not leaving anything to the last minute. So these are all good suggestions. Did anybody have anything else about earth fill and removal? Does the name of the bylaw change to earth fill and removal for removal and fill? I think it's still earth removal.
Well, so it's it doesn't.
Earth removal is fine.
Well, all right. So hang on one second.
That's a pretty minor point. So
it's currently a zoning bylaw amendment. This is the amendment to what it is you're amending, the earth removal bylaw. And this is again what you're amending, the earth removal.
Oh, I see. And then you rename it there.
What the new name will be.
Okay. All right. And thank you. All good discussion. So then the last item, and I can't remember if we do have any information about it, was information from the Economic Vitality Committee about parking. Do we have that, or is that coming up at a future meeting?
Nope, I have that as well. And it's been a busy week. This was something I think Marcia's, yep, there she is. So I'm gonna turn this over to Marcia so that she's been meeting with the Economic Vitality Committee, and I'll turn it over to her.
And actually, this just came up in their discussion last Tuesday. They voted to encourage the planning board to consider promoting the seasonal outdoor seating. And initially we were thinking it would be added to the definition. Elizabeth suggested that it really belonged with, since it's a parking requirement, to add it to the parking requirements, that there would be no requirement for outdoor seating, I mean, for parking, if you have seasonal outdoor seating. So this is in response to the pandemic, where the town waived the requirement to provide additional parking or seek waivers from the parking requirements to allow outdoor seating in a number of restaurants around town. And what the Economic Vitality Task Force recognized is that there was a strong desire in the community to have outdoor seating when the weather was nice and pleasant. But one of the drawbacks is that many restaurants can't even begin to undertake the required parking study that needs to be presented to the boards and committees. It always takes so much time. So this is a way of simplifying the process for restaurant owners. They would still need to go through the process of identifying what space outdoors that could be used for outdoor seating. They would still have to go through all of the Board of Health requirements to make sure that provision is made for cleaning and safe service and all that. And if they were serving liquor outside, they would still have to provide the separation between a public space and the restaurant space. But this was seemed to be a simple solution to address outdoor seating. And so they haven't, I don't think they've even written their letter yet to send to you. Elizabeth, I had a conversation with Elizabeth and decided to bring this to your attention and hope that you will consider it for annual town meeting this year. Any questions?
No questions. I look forward to seeing what they send over.
Okay.
I mean, I guess my only question is, were there previous restrictions against outdoor seating?
No, there wasn't a restriction per se, but the places that wanted to add outdoor seating, such as Main Street Cafe, the Colonial Inn, I think Haute Coffee in Concord Center, and then Woods Hill Table in West Concord, had to go through that process with the Board of Appeals when they're requesting waivers from the parking requirements to say, okay, we won't have these seats indoors, we'll have the seats outdoors, we'll address it in this manner, we'll rent spaces over here. So they had to go through a lot of different machinations to make the case for why seasonal outdoor seating would not be an impact on parking requirements. And most of the time, I can't think of a place where it was denied, but the majority of times the Zoning Board of Appeals would approve it.
So Marcia, if I may, so there's a separate review process just for the outdoor seating element, separate from this reviews the seating is separate from the parking.
No, well, they're not under zoning. There is for
Public
Board
Health.
of Health
Board of Health.
and for the alcohol service, the liquor licenses.
Okay, and I really like this idea, but I just have to ask, so would the extension of outdoor seating reduce indoor seating?
It would not because it's seasonal. It is.
Right. So is there I mean, other than a justification, as the present justification obviously makes a great deal of sense. The restaurants are at 25% or maybe 40% capacity now. They need to seat people outdoors. But going forwards, I'm just wondering about the concerns people will raise in the future about this being a way to create. This will create additional demand on parking spaces in places like the center.
And I'm doubtful that that's truly the case. If you had a choice, if you're going to a restaurant and you have the choice indoor or outdoor, you sort of weigh the two. If it's a really pleasant night, most people want to go outdoors. And in Concord Center, some of our retail businesses close at 6 or 8, when restaurants might be just picking up and getting going. So I think that there is an offset in that in normal times. And I think that this outdoor seating, this concept of outdoor seating is really going to enhance the visitor experience, the consumer's experience, and really promote the economic vitality in the community. So that's part of the basis for the ask from the Economic Vitality Committee.
And I agree 1000% with that. I'm just trying to differentiate them or create the rationale in my mind why a parking requirement that we otherwise put people through the ringer on, right? In terms of, I'm thinking to the coffee shop that recently opened in Concord Center, and there was so much discussion of the parking. Why outdoor seating shouldn't go through that same analysis? And I'm playing the devil's advocate here. I hope you appreciate.
I can't argue with that. I think that the building commissioner took a very narrow view of what that use looked like and would say, well, if you're going to have 20 seats out on the patio, Colonial Inn, you really should go through a parking review process, which they did. And they got the special permit because it was of a limited time period. So it's opening up an opportunity, and it's trying to really take a focus on the economic vitality in the community to say, well, maybe it's okay to have outdoor seating because it is only part of the time of the year. I don't know what the true negative would be out of all of that. So and I'm not necessarily advocating. I'm just trying to represent what
I agree entirely with you, Marcia, and I think it's a wonderful proposal. I just want to make sure that I can logically, justify it in my own mind, and I guess to the degree that the outdoor seating is also subject to a Board of Health requirement, so that what I worried about it's not so much that we may have a restaurant that instead of seating 80 people on a Saturday night can now seat 100 people, when otherwise the business district is quiet and there's plenty of parking. I worry about the unintended consequences of somebody taking a 20-seat restaurant and turning it into an 80-seat restaurant, right? Effectively, with the sidewalk heaters and everything, and then they're doing it year round. But I guess if there's a separate process for review by the Board of Health that would constrain the ability for people to create an unintended consequence here, then that.
So to answer your question on what that unintended consequence might look like, we could do a quick analysis of where all the restaurants are located and how much outdoor space they would have available to create that outdoor seating. And then we could do a quick calculation of, how much would that represent? And Elizabeth is raising her hand and saying yes, maybe.
Well, so to that point, I gotta look at what I wrote again. I think this might help to address that. So in the explanation to include what Marcia pointed out, that as far as the outdoor seating, primarily, and we can get information from the various restaurant owners, that a lot of the heavier time of outdoor seating is when many of the other shops in the area are closed. So that's one offset as far as parking. The other item where this currently says seasonal outdoor seating shall be exempt from the 1 space per 3 seats requirement, but maintain the requirement for as far as the employees, because part of this is also that it's not just they're going from a 20 seat to an 80 seat. Your kitchen has to have the ability to handle any additional seating. Your staff has to have, so it also comes down to economics. It comes down to, as far as like the Board of Health, they may not have the ability to handle that type of, dishwashing and, all of those other, factors that go into the restaurant.
Elizabeth, I
And-
think it's a really good insight, and I think that would really put to rest any concern I have in terms of it being a workaround. Yeah.
So to revise the language, seasonal outdoor seating shall be exempt from the requirement of 1 space for 3 seats rated capacity.
Yeah. And that way it's not it doesn't essentially expand the size of the restaurant, but it allows them to shift their business out onto the streets as the seasons allow. And I think that would probably reassure some people in our more, that live adjacent to our commercial districts.
Mhm. And we can also do a quick review of what was allowed for outdoor seating at Adelita's and at Paparazzi and Woods Hill Table. They gave up their parking spaces in order to provide for that, but that they would not be able to give up spaces necessarily. They would still probably have to go through some kind of special permit process if they were going to eliminate parking places.
Right. Right.
And they might have been able to demonstrate that even when they gave up their parking spaces, their capacity was still sufficient.
Mhm.
In the context of the pandemic.
Well, you're right.
Yeah. I mean, Adelita can actually get pretty hard to park there, even in that strip mall,
Okay.
without outdoor seating. But yeah. Anyway.
Well, thanks for bringing that before us. We will look forward to promoting the economic vitality of the town.
So I think it would be helpful to have a consensus on whether the board feels they want to move forward with that warrant article or not.
Are we going to receive something else from the committee? I thought they were saying that we were going to get something else.
I was hopeful that they would write a letter to encourage you to bring something to town meeting, but they haven't done that yet. So,
But no other supplemental information, like you're saying.
they haven't put it together. No.
What do people on the board think? Is this something we'd like to work towards, even if we kind of continue to tweak the language for this town meeting?
I would. Yeah, I think it's great.
Bernie says yes. Alan says yes. Nathan?
Yes.
Linda? So what are your impressions?
I feel, I mean, I certainly think this was very important during the pandemic. I feel like it's a little rushed in terms of deciding if this should go into our zoning regulations. Because if I dial back, a year ago, parking was a very challenging issue for a lot of people in town. And I think just to say, outdoor seating, I think is wonderful, but I'm not convinced that we should just throw the parking regulations out the window without a little bit more consideration.
Thank you.
I'm
Haley?
I'm glad
No,
to say, yeah, as long as we're in current conditions and the economy is where it is, there definitely should be waived by the board of, the select board, which is, I think what they've done. And I think that's very appropriate, but I'm not sure that I want to codify this on a long-term basis and then look back and say, yeah, it's fine. They put all those outdoor benches outside of Starbucks and we didn't think about what would happen to parking, et cetera, just sort of carte blanche. I just need,
Would-
I need
do-
a little bit more.
Yeah, do you think if we got some more data, like there, Elizabeth and Marcia were saying, like maybe they could look at the actual spaces and kind of what the potential capacity is, so we'd know what kind of potential volume? Think
Yeah,
that
I
would
mean,
help you?
I
Okay.
think that it would be good to have
Um,
some data to
some-
support.
Something else that gets,
It's kind of like the traffic study. You don't do a traffic study now, right? We've talked about that for various developments. You have to look back at what is, I mean, none of us know what normal is anymore, but I just don't feel like I want to make this decision with no data and ignoring what normal used to be. And try, I'd like to, I clearly want to support business development. And I know I want to deny that, but I think that I'd rather see, sort of carte blanche, select board say it's fine until things change. And then we could reconsider it.
Okay,
It's just-
thank you.
So-
And Elizabeth, did you have
yeah,
something to
so
add?
the two other points I want to make is, so one, the reference like Starbucks and having, little tables outside. There's other factors that go into, the outdoor seating. They still have to maintain all ADA requirements. They still have to maintain all fire department requirements. So you would not be able to, to put a little table and chairs on the sidewalk. So, I mean, there are other elements and maybe that goes into more an expanded, explanation on, why there's this offset and it's, they're not going to be, Cafe Nero is, never going to be allowed to put little table and chair out on the sidewalk. That's a public sidewalk and it's, you have to maintain 5 feet. Starbucks would never be able to put a little table and chair out on that sidewalk. So there are those other elements. Additionally, what's somewhat nice about zoning is you can propose something one year and if it really creates horrendous problems, you just delete it the next year. Seasonal outdoor seating and the park, by putting it in the parking aspect of it, you either have to have every season, you either have to have the required parking or you don't have the required parking. So it's not like it becomes a non-conforming use. So it's, the parking requirements are the parking requirements, and every time, every season, it goes away for the winter. And if you want to have seasonal outdoor seating the next year, you have to meet the parking requirements
So
for
these
whatever they are.
Yeah, these are all good questions and points. And since it was just introduced to us, I think we're going to formulate some more questions. So we will, let's, and Haley, I want to hear from you, but if you're in agreement, I think we'd like to see this again, continue to ask those questions and be able to answer them, to the satisfaction of ourselves. We're not making a decision today about putting it on the warrant, just kind of like, do we want to get more information about it, and then we can make a firm decision. So, but all of your questions, Linda, I think we need to ask them because that's what we're going to be asked, and we want to make sure that we've made an informed decision. So keep peppering us with questions for sure. But Haley, I didn't mean to skip you. What's your general impression?
No, I think the additional context about Starbucks and everything else was helpful, but definitely support.
Okay, so please keep it on the agenda, and then whatever other information you're able to, gather for us to kind of help us make sure that our wording is intentionally correct and that, it's something that we want to support, and it's the right thing to do for supporting economic vitality in the long run when we come out of this as well.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks for bringing it, Marcia. So I believe that's the last of our bylaw discussion. Let me open it up to public comment. If you have questions, comments on the bylaws that we just discussed bringing to town meeting, and that would be floodplain, groundwater, tree bylaw, 2-family, earth removal and fill, or this recent one about seasonal parking requirements. Raise your hand and we will call on you. So the first one I see is Stefan Bader. And just remember to say your name and address for the record before you comment, please.
Thank you, Kristen. Stefan Bader, 7 River Street. I was going to suggest that you might finesse the question of the parking by having the outdoor seating parking, the outdoor seating go along with a concomitant reduction in the indoor seating. So that if you have a permit for 80 seats and you want 20 outside, now you have only 60 inside, and you haven't changed the total, you've just changed where they're located. And you could have 20 outside on a sunny day and all 80 inside on a rainy day.
So that currently is the provision.
Well,
They could do that?
Any restaurant can do that right now.
Oh, really? They could just go outside? I thought they got the special permit for outdoor seating.
No, I mean, if it's, so like Woods Hill, that's what Woods Hill Table currently does.
It varies. In certain cases, they've done what Stefan has recommended. I think Colonial Inn is one of the places where they do that. They don't use all of their indoor seating, but it becomes a challenge for enforcement. You look at all the outdoor seating, then the building commissioner would need to go indoors to see if there was still empty seats. So it's not a really easy, simple thing to monitor or to enforce. But that can happen now. If you were to say, okay, building commissioner, I want to be able to have outdoor seating. I'm going to limit and not have seating over in this area. And he would say, fine. But they would have to have some kind of provision. It's when they go through the process of waiving parking requirements. Say you have 100 seats and you need to have 33 parking spaces and you can only put in 30. So then they go through this laborious process and then you say, but I would also like to have outdoor seating and here's how I would manage it. And it becomes a little more complicated, but it's already there. So this is just trying to make it really simple and clear that you don't have to have it. And
okay. Thank you for that explanation.
Thank you.
A quick question, sorry. When was the parking requirements last amended? Or how do we know that this works? Like we take it so, I mean, it feels so excessive for me, like just intuitively speaking, but was there any study done on this? And
There was the 2016 parking code analysis. Was that the most recent one? No, 2013 was the date on the memo.
But it's so complicated. I mean, just like, I mean, these are the things that we take, I mean, becomes a bylaw and then we take it for granted, but it changes the whole character of the place. But it's good to question these things sometimes, like if these parking requirements are even, it feels like, I don't know.
Yeah, I thought it was on our list to update the parking requirements.
I think it is.
I think it is. I think the parking requirements in the zoning bylaw are designed for standalone sites. And the problems that we keep running into are our village centers are something else entirely different. I think the parking requirements work for places like Virginia Road or for Baker Ave or at the edges of town, Forest Ridge Road, but they're not designed for the centers. And Alan is correct that we really need to look at what does it mean and what do we want the place to look like. I have experience with the parking study and the subsequent parking management plan that it is a really, really challenging program to try to develop because we have so many different people wanting to use parking, our public parking. And there are private entities that have a lot of parking that we aren't using near enough. So how do you open those conversations to create those arrangements that would allow public and private parking in the same location? And it's an ongoing challenge. And Elizabeth can attest to that.
Is it on our goals for this year? I can't remember. I feel like it was an actual something that we had on the plan, because I know we haven't achieved it yet. I don't remember it. I'd have to look. But we will not lose sight of that. I just think it's going to be a longer term issue. But I mean, to your point, and I know we'll go see that the proposed bylaw change again. I mean, it actually calls out the 1 per 3. What if that changes? You know, then this bylaw has to change too, rather than just referring to the parking requirement in another place in the bylaw. Good questions. All right, well, everybody was on the ball tonight. I don't see any more hands up for public comment. The remaining items for us are minutes, draft minutes of the December 22nd, 2020 meeting, and then the January 26th, 21 meeting. Shall we start with the 22nd meeting? See if there are any proposed changes or edits? And as a reminder, this was the meeting where we deliberated and then voted on the Main Street subdivision. Did anyone find any changes to be made?
Kristen, if there's no changes, I'd make a motion that we approve the minutes of the planning board of December 22nd as drafted.
Do you want to do that? Or do you want to do them both together? Because there's one more set. Save ourselves a vote.
Okay.
Let's look at the minutes of the 26th, which was our affordable housing discussion last time. All right, I'm seeing no proposed changes. Linda, you sure? Okay. All right, now I would love a motion.
Okay, I'd make a motion that we approve the minutes of December 22nd and January, was that 26th? As drafted, and yeah, that's the motion.
I'll second that.
Okay. Mr. Saya,
Yes.
Mr. Flint,
Yes.
Mr.
Thanks.
Bosdet,
Yes.
Ms. Orvidal,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
and this is Ms. Ferguson, yes. All right, thank you for preparing those minutes so quickly. Last items are liaison reports and town planner updates. Elizabeth, do you have updates? Besides all of the work that you have been doing?
Yeah. No. No, no updates that I can think of off the top of my head.
I've been kind of listening in on the Sustainable Energy Committee, and they are, continue to actively work on outreach. One of the things I was thinking about was whether, and Nathan, it might be you this year, I'm not sure if somebody else is doing it, a liaison with CAB, the Climate Advisory Action Board, as we're thinking about our green zoning initiatives. And again, that's kind of a longer term plan. But if we should be reaching out to someone there just to make sure we're talking to them about, our potential definitions of net zero and potential changes we might make. In addition to, working with Kate Hanley, but I was just thinking we really I haven't heard much from CAB in general lately. because they must maybe have heads down or something like that. So just maybe to let them know that we're going to be trying to work on this as kind of a bigger picture issue.
Well, Kate does lead that, so sort of working with her is indirectly working with Cam. So
Yeah, I didn't know if there was anybody on that committee that wanted to kind of liaise this way. And
yeah, that would be a good idea.
just to make sure we're, understanding their goals, and if we're considering certain green zoning initiatives that they're, going to dovetail and they're going to support what they're doing.
Kristen,
Which committee is that, Kristen?
CAB, Climate Action Advisory
Climate
Board.
Action Advisory Board. I can send an email to the sustainability director and ask her if.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're working with some people on that, so our we don't drop focus on that bigger picture of green zoning, which is going to take some work to work towards.
I've been emailing with Kate a bit, along with her and Gary. They've passed me some stuff recently from RMI, and so I know I had volunteered to kind of dig into the green zoning stuff. Haven't really done it yet, but she and I've been on some recent emails anyways.
No, that's great. I just want to make sure. I mean, there's already, a board. I want to make sure all the relevant boards are working together, so we don't pop our heads up one day and be like, oh, you were working on that? I was working on that. So, let's make sure we leverage what each other's doing, so that you don't have to go too far if they've already done something that you can use. And Burton?
yeah, I feel like the hour is late to raise this, but I would note that the Nuclear Metals Committee asked for feedback by, I think, the 19th, which is, I think, prior to our next meeting, on their draft report. This seems like something that is right within the planning board's wheelhouse to provide feedback on, and we haven't discussed it, or I'm just raising that because we were forwarded that by a couple of different committees.
Thank you. No, that's a good point.
So staff did not see the email till yesterday about that request. So I'm pretty sure, since Marcia works with that committee, the committee would be more than happy to give the planning board an extension for their comments.
Yeah, they'll be, looking at all of the comments on March 5th. So if you wanted to
Okay.
take this up at your meeting on the 23rd, that would be great. The draft is available. This is the second round of outreach, and we tried a number of different venues, and we finally said, well, we at least need to get town boards and committees. So
Yeah.
we do have it up. I've only received like 7 or 8 comments from the public. In general, we have the committee members have gone to each of their boards and committees and talked to different groups. So we're slowly getting the information in. And if you could make this an item on your February 23rd, that would be awesome.
Thank you, Marcia. I appreciate the extension. And I would just, on that note, I would encourage everybody to go and read the report. I think, the Nuclear Metals Committee has done an amazing job on putting it together. I've just quickly taken a quick look at it, but I think as members of the planning board, we're sort of uniquely situated in both having an understanding of what the long range plan goals are, and also hearing on a pretty regular basis people's concerns, feedback, and so forth on things that we should be encouraging or discouraging in town. And this is a large site where we could have a pretty large, or we could have a say in that as the planning process proceeds. So maybe we could put it on the meeting, and everybody could have a mental note to read it. Do better than I did for this meeting, which is just to read the report and have feedback.
Thanks. No, Burton, I appreciate you reminding us about that. So speaking of the next meeting, we can add this on. We can revisit any other town bylaws, or any next drafts of bylaws that we need to look at. And then I believe the other subdivision is coming back on Fitchburg Turnpike. Is that slated to happen on the 23rd? As of now, anyway.
As of now, but I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not
Okay.
sure. It may be continued again.
Okay. And then, Kate might have some data for us to look at about FAR. So I believe that's all that we have so far.
so far. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. The month is young. All right. I guess we'll see if there's any final public comment. I think we've probably heard from everyone, but let me just make sure. Anything else from the board before we adjourn? All right. Well, thanks, Elizabeth, for preparing all of those drafts for us. I know that's iteration upon iteration, and we'll continue to see those. You said we have 3 more meetings to work on those? Okay. So it's always great to have a deadline. All right. Well, with that, it's 9:26, and we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.